The most important Chris Chan video you can watch in 2025 is not this one. It's The Resurrection of Chris Chan full documentary by The Gamer from Mars. Welcome to Lore Cattle Ranch, my name is GiBi, and Gamer from Mars met up with and interviewed Chris and gained some unprecedented access to Chris's jail diary / new Bible. In this video, Gamer from Mars reveals some details that had previously been unknown. But Chris Chan lore is difficult to parse for newcomers, and Gamer from Mars got some things very, very wrong. So in this video, I'm going to explain the new lore we got from Gamer from Mars' video. I hope you enjoy. On April 11th, 2025, the Gamer from Mars uploaded an hour-long video about Chris's life post-jail.
This is Christine Weston Chandler, the creator of the webcomic Sonichu.
He had previously visited Chris in his hometown and made a short series about him before the incest allegations came out. This new video divulges new information about Chris, specifically from his goddess logs. Chris wrote a combination of a journal and the Bible while in jail, and he's been saying for years now that it'll get digitized and presumably sold, but we've seen very little updates on this front. So Gamer from Mars' video is our first real glimpse into the goddess logs. The live segments from his video were recorded in March 2024, around the time that Chris was banned from conventions, and around the time that Chris released his Christmas play. I have videos on both of these topics. I'm not going to cover the entire Gamer from Mars video, it's linked in the description, you should watch it yourself. As a Christorian going on 7 years now, I want to dissect Chris's writing. Jumping right into it, Gamer from Mars reveals that Chris, after being forced to leave his house, went to live with his aunt and uncle, or wanted to live with his aunt and uncle. Upon arriving, the cops came to remove him from their property, because apparently they wanted nothing to do with him.
You see, Harriet and Tom wanted nothing to do with their niece, and had contacted authorities in order to get her off their property.
Gamer from Mars states,
"If it hadn't been apparent before, this should have been the signal that Christine was well and truly alone in the world."
But this sentence is not entirely true. At this point, he still had Wildcat, or Sean, a former watchman, messaging Chris and helping him. Sean basically didn't stop contacting Chris until his arrest. Gamer from Mars mentions that Chris was in contact with some online friends, including Noel, but Noel had actually abandoned Chris by the time he was in the motel. He abandoned Chris when he found out that Chris withdrew money from Barb's bank account, violating their no-contact order and potentially stealing money. The first excerpt from the Goddess Logs that Gamer from Mars released show an insight into Chris's way of coping with his arrest. Finally able to resume after the big gamble's result, as foreseen, I was arrested. I played it honest and natural, because I was counting and appreciating my blessings. I did not fight, argue, or yell at the police. I've happily complied. As I have foreseen for the long run and bigger picture for I and the collectives between both universe halves, this particular outcome, and I had my choices, I felt this was the safest and most healing for I and everyone. Chris has continually stated that he is innocent over the last few years, saying that he lied to Bella to test her, and also lied to Noel, the owner of the Kiwi Farms, and Dylan, a former Christorian, when he confessed to them that the allegations were true. It's possible to read the big gamble as this lie that he told them to test them, but it's also very possible and likely that the gamble was telling Bella the truth in the first place. He also copes by saying that being arrested is what's best for everyone, stating that he had a choice in being arrested or not. This seems to be his way of dealing with the fact that his life was out of his own control. He's pretending that this is what he wants to happen.
Strangely, there are multiple letters in which Christine asks who would be the better kisser between Noel and Judas, and to this day nobody can quite figure out why she was so fixated on that question.
Gamer from Mars' statement here is vague. It's possible he doesn't understand the reference, or he doesn't understand why Chris is making the reference. Understanding anything Chris does is impossible, so I don't know if there's a reason to point out that second one. So let's assume it's the first one. This is a reference to the Bible. Judas speaks with guards and tells them that he will help them arrest Jesus. Since they don't know what Jesus looks like, Judas says that when he walks into the group of Jesus and his disciples, the one he kisses will be Jesus. That way they'll know who to arrest. So this kiss is seen as Judas's ultimate betrayal. When he kisses Jesus, it's marking him for death. Chris asking who's a better kisser, Judas or Noel, is just accusing Noel of betraying him by alluding to this biblical story. Who's the bigger betrayer, Judas or Noel? Although he doesn't have the citation on screen, Gamer from Mars claims that Chris wrote, "Anyone who attempts to deny Christine and or body of their technology, internet, and phone shall each fall immediately with heavy gases and fall spontaneously. Praise Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu. Seemingly, this was written when Chris believed himself to be possessed by Sonichu or Magi-chan. I find it odd that this ridiculous statement about Chris farting on people isn't cited. Gamer from Mars also claims that this fart thing is repeated throughout the logs, but once again, there's no citations. Chris was apparently put on some form of suicide watch after threatening to kill himself if he didn't get his phone and internet access. He needed these things for his plan. This threat did not go over well. Also, another restriction, due to the separate issue when I had replied to Jordan's letter in regard to a theory of my internet and phone restricted. I have plans that must have me keep and use my phone and the internet. So I had asserted that with a suicide threat. Valid move, bad move. I now have a will that is notarized. I made my impact, and during this observation time, razors are not permitted to me, and thus my beard of Jesus will complete the obvious image and fact about me in my past life. So Chris was on some form of suicide watch, they took his razors away, so now he's growing his beard, and of course he interprets this as just another fact, indicating that he is Jesus, as he will have a Jesus beard. Chris also claims that Jesus himself gave Chris the title of Lord. Also, know that by Jesus Christ's, of this timeline, personal word and duty, he has entrusted unto me all of his powers and energy, and has stepped down as your Lord. That honor, duty, and title has been entrusted unto me now. Gamer from Mars interpreted this as Jesus inhabiting Chris's body, the way that Sonichu and Magi-chan often do.
Jesus Christ himself. It's unclear how he was able to possess Christine when she had previously asserted herself to already be Jesus Christ reincarnated, but I digress.
But that's not what Chris said here. When the restraining order was lifted, Barb went to visit Chris in jail. As we'll see throughout Gamer from Mars' reporting, Barb doesn't seem to have any issues with Chris that one might assume she would after the alleged sexual encounters. Barb told Chris that his cell phones and iPad are safe at home, but some of his belongings were confiscated by the police. Chris became angry about this and threatened the cops. By heaven's armies, all that had been confiscated from the Sonichu temple shall immediately be returned there, and the police who stole these items and their entire police station, and whoever has these items at present, shall be punished or slaughtered by heaven's soldiers. Chris refers to his home as the Sonichu temple, that's what he means there. He also had previously indicated that the spiritual forces that are on his side are attacking police when he was originally arrested. He said that Magi-chan was kicking the cops, and then told Magi-chan to hit the cops harder. There's a great piece of speculation from Gamer from Mars that I'll play now.
Even her mundane games of solitaire soon became part of the ever-expanding lore. In the margins of the goddess log pages, she would occasionally write down which cards she dealt first each day, seeming to divine some sort of great cosmic significance from it. Eventually, this also extended to the numbers on her daily razors as well.
I think it's likely that Chris, often used to getting his life advice from TV shows and fictional media, needed to attain it from somewhere other than from within to keep his worldview going, and so he started to look for random occurrences in things like playing cards and razor serial numbers. This is a great attention to detail on the part of Gamer from Mars. With that said, Gamer from Mars mischaracterizes a passage about COVID.
Chris Chan seemed to imply that the global pandemic had actually started in another timeline before infecting ours due to a curse.
The passage says, "It's a cloudy morning, but good enough for this day in this alternate beta timeline." What Magi-chan wrote yesterday is very much true in fact, y'all. I, too, have known of this paradox event, and my physical jump from the timeline I am supposed to be on and shall return to. I was not yet fully prepared to face and counter Sockness in person, much less the curse he had placed on China about less than 2 years ago that ended up spread worldwide in this beta timeline. Chris is saying that both in the real timeline, our world, and this other timeline, the beta timeline, COVID was caused by Jacob Sockness cursing China. If you don't know who Jacob Sockness is, I have a whole playlist on him called The Sockness Files. He was in love with Chris and had his own Sonichu-like lore where he is a magical alien. Chris rejected a lot of Jacob's lore, but does believe on some level that it's true. Jacob's evil god OC Jacoba is real in Chris's lore, and he also believes that Jacob has the power to curse people. Yes, he does blame Jacob for COVID because he cursed China. I think Chris is saying in this log that both dimensions, our dimension and the beta timeline, can blame COVID on Jacob. But in the other dimension, the beta timeline, I was not yet fully prepared to face and counter Sockness in person, much less the curse he had placed on China. So in the other timeline, that universe's Chris was not able to fight Jacob. So our Chris went to that timeline to help. COVID did not spread from that timeline to ours, as the Gamer from Mars says. It exists in both of our universes, but that universe's Chris needed our universe's Chris's help. Gamer from Mars says this about some of Chris's writing. I'll have to play the segment so that you understand what the Gamer from Mars' interpretation is.
She also wrote frequently about the war between Russia and Ukraine, seeming to believe that the real-world attacks were causing rifts in the timeline and causing her spiritual distress. At least, that's the best I can figure it, since it can often be incredibly difficult to figure out exactly what Christine is trying to say in regards to the merge.
With my further heightened psychic senses, we ended up sensing blood pressure spikes a few times as the body suddenly literally lit up like a light bulb, and I had to consciously focus and ground myself well to hold on. As later confirmed on WTOP 107.7 FM radio news station, a rocket was fired during that time, and a literal rift and a solar storm shocked the rocket and knocked 40 satellites out of orbit into Earth's atmosphere. Yep. Another meta sign of Putin's World War III attack on Ukraine.
Chris does believe that the war in Ukraine is a sign of the merge, which he says about basically everything. He pinned the blame on the Notre Dame Cathedral fire from 2019 on a Pokemon battle. But Chris often talks about his physical problems, like being lightheaded or getting headaches or blackout-like events, as being psychic battles. His blood pressure spiking and lighting up like a light bulb are his way of explaining his body's problems away as being the result of his magic. His magic is contained within this crude human form, and so he gets headaches. It's possible that what Chris is saying is that because he had blood spikes on this particular day, he's claiming that what he was fighting against psychically was Russia. He's expending magical energy to stop Russia, thus explaining his headaches. The next section that Gamer from Mars gives us, which he leaves out from his reading but is visible on page, shows that Chris is partly explaining away his symptoms by having a virus, probably COVID, but he's also saying it's due to intense psychic battles. A rocket being launched coinciding with Chris's illness is, to Chris, a meta sign of the merge. He's using meta here to mean something like foreshadowing or dramatic irony. The world just sees this event as something that is happening, but it will later be revealed that this was an action directly causing or leading to the eventual dimensional merge. Putin's World War III is something that will happen, so this rocket is just a stepping stone toward it. Like if you were to write down historical events from the 20th century, only keeping in very important details, you would probably say that the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was an important moment in time because it ultimately led to World War I, which then ultimately led to World War II. So imagine that Chris is saying that the moment that Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, Chris, on the other side of the world, felt a disturbance in the Force, knowing that this was an important moment in time. He could see the future, he knew that World War II and the Holocaust were coming, and he knew that when Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, this was a meta moment foreshadowing the future horrific event. That's what Chris is saying here. He's just talking about the present and the future because he thinks he can see the future. Chris's lawyer apparently wanted to send Chris to a mental health facility, but Chris rejected the idea, saying out loud at his hearing to the judge that he needed to go home or the apocalypse would be premature. That's Chris's way of saying that if things don't go according to his vision of the future, we will have a bad end of the world instead of a good end of the world. He's leading us to the dimensional merge, which is a good way the world will end. If this doesn't happen, then the world will end in a bad way.
This outburst seemed to make authorities believe Christine was on drugs, since upon returning to jail, she was horrified to find her cell had been thoroughly inspected and some of her belongings confiscated.
We get this statement from Gamer from Mars without citation, but given his access to the logs, I'll take this as true. Chris obviously viewed this as a major insult. One of the more insane things Chris wrote in the logs was that an inmate's counterpart in C-197 died while pregnant, and so when the real inmate gave birth in our universe, the baby had 3 souls in it. This inmate's self-counterpart in C-197 was 3 months pregnant but died 6 months ago. She and the child's soul migrated here, but they both went into the baby, so the baby has 3 souls in it upon arrival. Also, with the events, demons have been scouring this jail building. That baby arrived with a demon inside it too, and this child is literally a ticking paradox bomb, not set to stick around long. That's just incredible. He's saying that this new baby is gonna die because it died in another dimension before it was born. Okay. The possibility of Chris leaving jail was floated, but due to some form of a restraining order, Chris wouldn't be able to move back in with Barb. Chris apparently wished Barb would give up the house for his benefit. That's a very charitable interpretation. He says she is not only still alive, but also stubborn, which to me implies that Chris is saying that the most preferable outcome would be Barb leaving the house so he could live there. The second most preferable outcome would be her dying so he could live there. And the least preferable outcome would be him not being allowed to live there. We then get another section from Mars interpreting something in the exact opposite way that Chris likely intended it.
Barbara is in her rose chew form / body on the C-197 Earth half, and the human body that lives at the Sonichu temple in Lingering is a partial soul form or shell of herself. We and our body still can't help but weep once again for the pending loss of Barbara's human body.
This was one of Christine's few moments of clarity in a very long time. Despite the layers of lore she had created in order to shield herself from reality, she still, on some level, seemed to understand that once Barbara died, that would be the end. There would be no life eternal as a Rose Chew in Quickville. She would be gone, and Christine would be all by herself.
Chris states that living with Barb would be uncomfortable, saying that deeply discomforting, especially with what little of Barbara still remains in Barb. This seems to be saying that she lacks lucidity in some way. Chris doesn't see her as herself anymore, and this is distressing. This is, of course, something that many people with relatives who have dementia or Alzheimer's will go through. The person's still alive, but they're not themselves anymore. Barbara is in her Rose Chew form body on the C-197 Earth half, and the human body that lives at the Sonichu Temple in Lingering is a partial soul form or shell of herself. Here, Chris is saying that Barb has already crossed over and is inhabiting her Rose Chew body. Chris believes that when people die, they merge with their counterpart in C-197. His father, Bob, is already over there, living as a sonichu. He thinks when Barb dies, she will live on as a Rose Chew. But because she likely has dementia, Chris is attributing this to most of her soul, or her mind, being in that Rose Chew body already. It's like the expression having one foot in the grave. Barb is mostly already dead. And to Chris, being dead means being in C-197. What remains of her is a partial soul shell. The real her is over there. Part of her remains here. Gamer from Mars somehow interprets this backward. This is not Chris seeing through his delusions. This is Chris doubling or tripling down on them. He's not just coping with Barb's death, saying that she'll be in Quickville when she dies. He's coping with Barb's dementia, saying that her real mind is already in Quickville. While Chris was in jail, Kiwi Farms was briefly offline. Chris heard about this and wrote, Kiwi Farms forum site that started as purely a quick hate forum site. Gone. Completely. Clean. Good. Holy. Bye. And nothing was backed up from Kiwi Farms, so they can never ever come back with the past hatred and toxicity against me. Which is not true, as the website is back up. So much for Chris seeing the future. Gamer from Mars gets a minor fact wrong, talking about Flutter.
The most frequent individual that Christine was seen hanging out with was a young woman who was identified only as Flutter, due to her love of the My Little Pony character Fluttershy.
She was not identified as Flutter due to her love of the My Little Pony character. Chris told us to call her Flutter. It's likely that Chris calls her this because her personality reminds him of Fluttershy. Gamer from Mars' statement implies that investigators tied her to some online account that liked Fluttershy. That's not what happened. Chris just told us to call her that. Gamer from Mars asks Chris what the meaning of life is. This is Chris's response.
I say best described by the upside down face girl from Amusing World of Gumball. It's just more about, it's essentially about the journey and doing things that best feel and feel good with you and all that, and life power and good, and just enjoying life along the way and doing what you can to do good and help others. So yeah.
Gamer from Mars says,
and the two still deny that any wrongdoing had ever taken place between them.
It's unclear what his source is for this, but he claims that Barb is denying that anything happened between herself and Chris. Given Chris's claims that she's not mentally all there, and his previous claims that she was zombie-like before the alleged affair, it's unclear if Barb is even capable of denying that anything happened. It's unclear if she's a reliable source. And even if she is, Gamer from Mars doesn't cite anything for this statement. Gamer from Mars ends the video putting on a sonichu medallion, which many people believe to carry a curse. I'm gonna end this video with a plea to Gamer from Mars to release everything he has from the logs. He says multiple times throughout the video that Chris's writing is hard to decipher, and, in my opinion, he makes some incorrect assumptions about Chris's writing. I genuinely think it'll take the entire internet to crack this thing. With that said, it's very possible that Gamer from Mars can't release it, because Chris does want to publish it and make money from it at some point, so he forbade him from releasing it online. But if that's not the case, I will personally advocate for it to be released in full. Thank you for watching. Be sure to be nice to each other in the comments, consider supporting the creators you admire, never lose sight of the things that are important to you, and go out and zap to the extreme.